Thanks, Jill, for that introduction. So what we're going to touch upon this morning for 20 minutes or so is just an introduction to Lean Six Sigma. Obviously, we haven't got time today, or indeed, you haven't got time over a number of days to go into any great detail. So we'll touch upon the main points with reference to Lean and Six Sigma. So a brief introduction to myself. Spent 30 years in the steel industry. Released last year, set up my own company, set up my own consulting business. For the last 4 or 5 years, I was actually the improvement manager for British Steel. And many people sort of look at that and say, well, that's all about heavy engineering, etc. And we indeed got those kind of queries and questions in the last webinar we did. Actually, my greatest success in delivering Lean Six Sigma, both training, facilitating, coaching, developing people's skills and actually getting it implemented, is in the non-engineering heavy end of the industry. I mean, to be perfectly blunt, the iron and steel makers weren't overly keen on this kind of stuff, but certainly the mills, the functions, finance, procurement, HR, etc., were very, very keen on this training, and indeed did deliver lots of absolutely fantastic improvements through the use of Lean Six Sigma. I'm a master black belt, fully accredited with the British Quality Foundation, and I've delivered training to literally hundreds and hundreds of people over the last 10 years or so. So that's a little resume of myself. A lovely picture of myself, the bottom right. The top right is actually me showing the then director of our logistics department, and this is about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, one of the visual boards that we actually created at that time. Just goes to show that actually a lot of the stuff we'll be talking about today isn't particularly new either. It's stuff that's been around for many years, if not decades. And certainly it's not about it's not rocket science what we're going to be talking about. That visual board there used to control circa about 15 to 20,000 ton of steel dispatches out into the UK and Europe in a week, and that was a very simple board that controlled everything. When we had delivery standards in excess of 99%. And made sure that we delivered on time when the customer wanted, and it was all driven by that one visual board. So before we jump into Lean Six Sigma, let's just have a quick introduction to continuous improvement, because in reality, Lean Six Sigma and indeed all the various structured methodologies come from something called continuous improvement. And CI is all about the constant reassessment, elimination of waste across everything that you do. Quite often referred to as Kaizen. Often when you go into businesses, they'll talk about Kaizen projects. Kaizen, simply put in Japanese, is continuous improvement or change for the better. I always like to think that CI, continuous improvement, works beyond just your CI projects. Quite often there's a danger when you set up CI projects that it becomes the all focus. And in reality, CI to me is a way of life. And indeed, the behavioral side of CI, which we won't get into today, the behavioral side is the really difficult stuff to put across. And the courses that Jill mentioned earlier on do go into behavioral cultural standards, because I'm a great believer that actually CI is all about cultural change rather than actually just delivering the hard skills of how to do process mapping. Okay, so that's continuous improvement. Why do we want to do continuous improvement? Because we all have a need to improve. We want to be winners, okay? Lovely photographs here of taken of the British Olympic team. And I always slot this in early on because most people follow the Olympics. They may also follow football, rugby, etc., etc. But if you listen to any particular good sports coach, you will hear them talking the language of continuous improvement. Give you an example of the British cycling team. Brailsford was very much about incremental improvements. They would take the bike apart, they would take the wheels apart, they'd take the clothing apart, they'd take the people apart, and they would pull them all together to create world beaters. And they're essentially using the principles of continuous improvement to create what became winners. Another key facet of continuous improvement dating back from the 1950s is the PDCA cycle, the Plan, Do, Check, Act. And that lies behind every single methodology that you might come across, including Lean Six Sigma. What's it all about? It's all about the plan. The plan actually should constitute about 50% of the time spent on any particular project, any particular job that you do. The plan is all about determining your goals, your targets, what you want to do, putting your plan together. The do, check, and act is you get on with it. You check what you've done has actually done what you set out to achieve. If it has done what you set out to achieve, then you lock it in using some form of standard operating procedure, or you go back to the plan and go round the cycle again. And it's a continuous cycle around that PDCA. So let's look at Lean Six Sigma. And as I said, there are other methodologies available, things like A3 thinking, 8D methodology used by Ford. They're all based on PDCA. The reason I like Lean Six Sigma is, well, we'll come on to that as I go through the course. But to my mind, it's a broad methodology that has lots of different elements, and it has lots of things that suck in people from one side of the improvement spectrum to the other side of the spectrum. And it's proven. If you look at various companies across the world, many have used it to improve the way they operate. The classic examples, obviously, GE and Motorola, DuPont. A lot of companies use this as the backbone to their operating systems. Really good example in this country. And if you ever get the chance, and they do offer them, is a tour of of Caterpillar, one of the Caterpillar factories. They use Lean Six Sigma as their foundation methodology of how they actually improve the way they operate. One of the key things I find with Lean Six Sigma is the methodology, is that everybody talks the same language. And this is really, really important. As Jill mentioned, we offer a leadership course, often with improvement courses. It's all about training a few people on improvement techniques, but you forget about the leaders. The actual the way people talk, the language people use, is really important in terms of the behavior. It is no good if you've got a lot of guys working, let's say, a 5S program, if you have a senior leader come along and demand to know what the hell they're doing and why they're wasting time doing that particular job. So it's a fixed language. You go to Caterpillar, everybody talks in the same way, in the same language. So let's look at the two components. First component is lean. What is lean all about? Lean is all about the identification and elimination of something called waste in all your activities. Okay, what do we mean by waste? Well, these are things that waste your time. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail later on. But lean, what lean brings in is some of the tools and techniques that are really of a practical sense on the shop floor, that reduce waste, reduce the amount of time that you're wasting. Classic one. This is a classic. You know, your cleaning station. People kind of often laugh at cleaning stations. Not a particularly good example because it's not a proper shadow board, but this particular cleaning location is located very close to the point of process. Why is it important? Because that particular process produces a lot of dirt. We allow dirt to accumulate, then the likelihood is that you'll have some form of engineering issue. When the guys want to clean, can they locate the sweeps? Well, yes, they can, because they're located close by. It actually fulfills a really, really important role in allowing your process to produce as much as it possibly can. Associated with that, we got standard operating procedures. So this is a standard work for a laboratory. Again, associated with British Steel, but it's a laboratory. It is a fairly clean working area. What this is doing is telling somebody precisely, this is how you do the job. Why is that important? Because actually we rely on people doing their jobs properly and effectively. And often what you get is people, through laziness or through wanting to do their own thing, going off and doing it in a different way, which might not be the best way of actually operating. So standard work, really, really important part of lean. Collect all those together into a control board. This particular control board, again, close to the point of process, displays loads of information that is of importance to the operator. The top left of the photograph are the standard operating procedures. The bottom left is something called a control plan that is actually the operator's Bible in terms of what can go wrong, what risk they need to reduce. The top right, which is the red and green photographs, is the training plan. It's telling the operators who's trained on particular pieces of kit. The middle right, which has got a photograph, it's not particularly clear on this, but on the bit is the actual quality standard for that particular area. And on the bottom right are the 5S charts. So they have a regular 5S audit every week to ensure that their standards are maintained. So that's something called a control board. This is your classic visual management boards. These are the war room at one of the distribution centres at British Steel. And shows actually the mix that's becoming more popular these days. One on the right hand side is your classic whiteboards. The left hand one is the actual is IT, showing the current state of affairs of deliveries into the marketplace. Every morning and every afternoon, the management team collect around these boards and discuss what's gone on, what the plan for the day is, and how they're going to achieve it. And then the last element with Lean is all about pull, is all about the Kanban systems. This again is a store for a laboratory. The colored cards you can see on there are basically Kanban cards that are controlling the amount of equipment, the amount of inventory that you use in that particular process. So that's a little bit about Lean, 5 principles around Lean. The first principle, all important, is all about value. It's about identifying the value of the product and the process in terms of the customer. In other words, it's what we refer to as the voice of the customer. All important. You'll be absolutely amazed how often people forget that one critical one critical item, which is all about listening to what the customer has to say about stuff. The second principle is all about the process. It's all about understanding where the value is in your process, mapping your process out, and understanding what is waste and what isn't waste. That's all about process mapping. It's about value stream mapping, etc., etc. The third element is waste itself, removing everything that prevents flow from happening. So what you're trying to achieve in your workplace is smooth flow, where there are no obstructions in the way from that product moving through and going direct to your particular customer. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. The fourth element is only produce at the rate the customer requires. So this is only producing what the customer wants. So trying to avoid at all times heavy backlogs of inventory. And then the fifth element is all about that pursuit for perfection, that zero waste, giving the customer exactly what they want when they want it. Let's have a look at waste in itself. So classically, we talk about the 7 wastes. In the courses, we talk in detail about each of these different wastes. Consultants, being consultants, tend to invent lots more. So this particular diagram, there's a couple of others. There's people, creativity, there's skills, there's the environment. But generally what I advise is concentrate on the 7 wastes: transportation, waiting time, motion, overproduction, etc. And it's a really good, on its own, in its own way, it's a really, really good way of going to your process and actually looking at it in a structured way to identify what is stopping the flow happening in your particular work area. Associated with waste is essentially the 3 types of activity that you'll have in your process. So you guys sat there will identify with probably the waste on the left hand side, all the things that can go wrong, all the unnecessary work, and you're looking to eliminate that. That's the stuff you want to get rid of. The value adding stuff, so this is the stuff that actually adds value. It changes the nature, the shape or characteristic of your product or service in the eyes of the customer. You want to max out on that. The bottom bit is non-value adding. So this is all stuff which is work which you need to carry out because it is necessary under your current conditions. So for example, classic example in the steel industry you've got a blast furnace, you need to take your iron to the steel plant in a train. That's transportation. You could describe that as waste, but it's necessary because no one has yet come up with a way of putting a blast furnace directly above a steel plant. Or have they? Because actually, in some of the more modern plants, that's the way that they're going. They're removing that unnecessary, that non-value adding activity. But typically, it's things like inspection. You might have a product that you produce where you're not particularly sure that you're actually producing the proper product, and you might have to inspect it. Health and safety is often something that is a non-value adding activity. It is absolutely necessary, but you should be always looking to see how can you still do it effectively, if not better, but in minimal time. Okay, so those are the three different types of waste that we have. Three different types of activity we have: waste, which you're looking to eliminate; value adding, which you're looking to maximize; and non-value adding, which is you're looking to minimize. And they all, again, essential things behind something called process mapping. Okay. And typically, this is the kind of stuff you find. This graphic I'm telling is about 20 years old now, actually, the one I use. But this was typically of Toyota 15, 20 years ago. But if you think about it, and I certainly know people have done studies on people's works time, this is what's commonly found. You find in a person's work that 60% of it is actually wasted activity that you could eliminate, or let's certainly eliminate proportions of that. 35% is non-value added, so you can minimize that, but only 5% is actually adding value to the way that you operate. So that's a very, very quick flick through lean. In the courses, we generally spend probably half a day on talking about that and going through the various bits and pieces. Six Sigma is normally the other half. Couple of slides. I apologize for the busyness of this particular slide, but Six Sigma does have a bit of a name for itself as being a little bit, it's all about statistics, problem solving, etc., etc. Six Sigma, compared to lean, is far more systematic. It's a far more systematic approach to improvement. It looks to remove the cause of defects and reduce something called variation. And we measure variation by using standard deviation, or sigma, hence the word Six Sigma. Reason for Six Sigma is the companies that invented it were constantly looking to have all their product produced within 6 sigmas of the mean. See what I mean? We're getting into a lot of statistical stuff. Now that cooks a lot of people's buckets. They like that sort of thing. And certainly when you look at some of the companies that used it in some detail, Motorola, General Electric, exactly, it did them a hell of a lot of good. Okay, but that's Six Sigma. Does it apply to you? Absolutely. All you guys will produce a product or service. To do that, you need to operate in a process. HR, and I've had many battles with HR over many, many things, they would always argue, well, it doesn't really apply to me. I would ask the very basic question, well, do you recruit a graduate? Do you recruit people? That is a process. Recruiting somebody, even though it might take you 6 months to do it, is a process in itself. When you have a process, then you will get performance variation. If you look at recruiting a graduate, in the old days of Tata Steel, we discovered a team of 12 people, all 12 operated to a different standard. There is your variation. And because you have variation, you have potential for big business problems. Okay, so Six Sigma is looking to reduce that, and it can be operated, and I have loads of experience and expertise in terms of the finance, procurement, etc., where they used it to good effect to reduce the amount of variation that they had in their processes. So we have lean, we have Six Sigma. In the early 2000s, some bright spark thought, well, they actually complement each other. Let's merge them together and we produce a comprehensive set of principles all about removing waste and reducing variation. Lean Six Sigma essentially is data-driven problem solving. Central element of it is getting data, information in, measuring stuff, getting statistics, looking at where you're going wrong to drive you to actually look at the right root causes to then drive improvements and then drive an element of control. The really good thing about Lean Six Sigma in my mind is that you can have all sorts of characters in it. So you can have people on the left-hand side of this particular graphic who really major on the lean stuff. And I've known loads of people like that in the steel industry who love to create the practical sort of sides of lean, getting out there, creating control boards, doing the 5S, creating really good visual management. I always like to refer to those kinds of people as the hippies of the lean world. They go out and they just go and do it. But Lean Six Sigma has also got a home for your really technical geek-like people who love a little bit of statistics. They love a little bit of maths, and I often refer to them. They're the geeks of the lean world. The most powerful element of Lean Six Sigma is when you get the two groups of people who work on the data, on the statistics, getting to root cause, who can then use the real hippies, the lean people of the Lean Six Sigma world, to go out and do the practical changes, etc., that are required. That's a really, really powerful tool, because at the end of the day, all improvements ultimately lead to a reduction in variation in the eyes of your customer. So you reduce variation, you will improve the product that you're sending through to your ultimate customer. Consistent quality without delay. 7 principles around Lean Six Sigma. There's that focus on the customer. There's that focus on the process, the way that the work gets done. There's about managing, improving, and smoothing the flow and removing the waste that appears within it, reducing variation, involving everybody in the way that you operate, and then undertaking it in a systematic way. And again, this is another element of Lean Six Sigma that I really love, is that you go about your projects, everything you do, in a really systematic, you have a real systematic approach over it called the make. Okay, so introduce you to the theme of the make. So what's that stand for? The D is for define. So what you do is you go out and you define your opportunity. You create the scope of your problem. You create a problem statement. You create a project charter. You think of what is the cost of poor quality. You gather a team together. You make sure that everybody understands this is the problem that we're going to resolve. We then move on to measure and analyze. And I often group the two together. You go out, you get your data, you go and measure it. You go out and you time how long your process is going to take. You measure your lead times. You look at what your work in progress is. You look at takt times. You maybe measure your Sigma ratings. You get into some graphical and graphical recording of the data. And then at the same time, or concurrently, you analyze that data. And at the end of that phase, measure, analyze, you often get to a point where you have identified a number of issues that need to be improved. We then move to the improve phase. We go out and we improve those issues that you have identified. And then lastly, but most importantly, we enter the control phase. This is where you create controls in place. These are things like your standard operating procedures, your confirmation, your control charts, to ensure that your improvements are fixed in tablets of stone and they don't revert back. Okay, so then you go through that process and then you start on the next project, and then the next project, and the next project. And as I said at the bottom, it's a very simple way of actually, even if you've got a fairly small project, think in your own mind that let's go through that demake process. And lastly, Lean Six Sigma, absolutely fantastic methodology, but I always advise people to start with your foundations. It's very easy to jump into the deep end and start creating lots of Lean Six Sigma projects without having your actual foundations in place. And when I'm talking foundations, I'm talking about things like, have you got 5S? Is your workplace properly organized? Have you got something called daily management in place? In other words, have you got the visual management, the standard work, the control plans and confirmation in place? Because at the end of the day, if you don't have those elements in position, then a project, an improvement project, is liable to fail because it hasn't got those foundations in place. And that, I think, is the end of a very swift tour through Lean Six Sigma.